Hi, Sai here, and Sai for Music Radar. Today you've brought in the new Moog Labyrinth, haven't you?
Labyrinth, yeah.
Yeah.
So we were here a few weeks ago talking about Moog's new Spectravox, which is was their first hardware product in ages, since basically the company's been bought out by InMusic with the changes, blah, blah, blah. And so, we waited ages for one semi-modular from Moog, and now we've got another one.
Two turn up at once.
Yeah, just barely a few weeks later.
Bit of a different proposition, though, of course.
Yeah, so Spectravox was a kind of analog vocoder.
Yeah.
This is something that Moog are calling a Parallel Generative Analog Synthesiser.
Which neatly moves me straight onto, what the hell does that mean?
Yeah, it's one of those, it's the sort of collection of words which, like, you know, if you go out to a restaurant, like sometimes you see things on a menu which is like, you know, fried, dirty chicken, mayonnaise, you're like, I'm not even going to think about what these mean in context. I'm just going to order that.
Yeah,
this is the kind of subscript. Like, like they're all words. The inner kind of what records found in my head is just like, fine. I'm on board without actually thinking how it works. So how does it work? That is a good question. So the parallel and generative aspects of this kind of relate to two separate but interconnected elements of what's going on.
Okay.
So basically what this is a 2 oscillator synthesizer with a randomizing sequencer attached.
Okay.
And there's kind of different ways that these can interact. For the start, let's talk about this and just ignore this sequencer for a second.
Okay, so we're just going to concentrate on the two main oscillator bits.
We are, yeah. So the sequencer obviously is really important to the character and what it does.
Yeah.
But I think if we dive straight into that, you kind of overlook some really interesting stuff going on with the synth engine itself.
Yes, and I need to understand this, so let's go.
So for that purposes, what we're going to do is we're plug in the MIDI output from this KeyStep Pro here. So obviously this flags up the thing that
it's got MIDI.
Yeah, you've seen us discuss any of these Moog semi-modular things in the past, we've often brought up the fact that like some of them include MIDI inputs and some of them don't. I often feel like the ones without MIDI inputs is almost, it's making it unnecessarily difficult because it makes it harder to integrate them into a studio and things like that. So yeah, great. This has got MIDI.
Yeah.
And what we're going to do is we're going to use that MIDI to just play the kind of basic elements of the synth engine so I can talk you through what's going on.
Yeah, sure.
So as I said, we've got two oscillators here. At the moment, I've got this top oscillator is the only one turned up.
Yeah. And it's a sine wave.
A basic sine wave oscillator. Yeah. So the second oscillator here, you'll see that these are named slightly differently. Top one is named VCO. It's just named VCO, and it's a sine wave. The second one is named Mod VCO.
Okay.
So the difference here is the Mod VCO, it's a triangle wave, so it's a slightly different wave, but also, more importantly, if we turn that top oscillator down and this bottom one up, you'll see at the top end of the range here, obviously, we're kind of making noise like we would with a normal oscillator, but then it goes all the way down to these really low ranges where it basically acts like an LFO.
Yeah, sure, right.
So what this is doing is basically giving us a second oscillator, which works both as a sound generator, like a kind of a classic 2 oscillator analog synth where we can blend the 2 oscillators, and also as a source of modulation, either audio rate modulation or slower modulation.
Yeah.
And that
saving space for
and that kind of comes into play a lot with all of these features here.
Yeah.
A lot of which basically let us combine and modulate the 2 oscillators.
Okay.
We'll get back to that in a second.
Sure.
First, let's talk about where these go. So we've got the 2 oscillators plus noise output, and then outputs from ring modulation and cross modulation for these 2 oscillators, which, like I said, we'll come back to. What these do is these go into a mixer section here, and it's this kind of mixer section which is the kind of key parallel element of what's going on with Labyrinth. So you have 2 things here. This top one, you have a voltage controlled wave folder, and this bottom one we have a voltage controlled filter. So the voltage controlled filter is kind of standard Moog fare, like it kind of
it's sort of your East Coast,
you get
West
what it
Coast
is.
Bits, right?
Yeah, so you kind of voltage controlled filter. The interesting thing about the filter, so let's we've got this blend control here. So what this does, by the way, is this blends between the output of the 2. So as we were saying before we dive into them, so what happens after these 2? So we've got the wavefolder up top, the filter down the bottom here, and rather than being recombined, those both go into their own voltage controlled amps.
Right.
So kind of amplifier obviously being the last bit in a signal chain, the bit that makes the noise loud enough to be output.
Yeah.
And so each of these elements have got their own amplifiers at the output, which can be controlled by different envelopes. And then we've got this little switch here and this blend control, and that kind of controls how they're arranged. So the blend control will kind of says where everything from the oscillators is going first. So if we have it in parallel, it's going out to both the wave folder and the filter in equal amounts. Obviously, if we put it up to the wave folder there first, then it's all going into the wave folder first, and then that's going into the filter. And then obviously the other way around, will go into the filter, then go into the wave folder. This blend control then controls where we're kind of taking output from. So obviously if we have it all the way over the wave folder, then it doesn't matter where the wave folder is placed in that chain, we're just hearing the output of the wave folder, whether that's kind of before, after, or in parallel with the filter. And similar all the way over here, we're getting just the filter. So for these purposes, so let's just have this basic oscillator turned up. Let's put it all the way over, I'll put them in parallel, put it all the way over to the filter. And so obviously you can hear.
And then shall we dial back into the wave folder?
Well, let me just show you something about the filter first.
Okay.
So the filter first is worth saying. Let's turn down modulation. So pretty standard filter. We've got resonance here, as you would expect from a Moog filter. A bit of resonance, adding some extra characters to that basic sine wave. But you've also got this blend knob here. So this filter works. Is kind of basically morphable between low pass at one end, so obviously where we're just filtering out the high frequencies, and band pass where it's kind of filtering out low and high and just putting a bit in between. And so we can say, as well as sweeping the filter cutoff itself, we can sweep. Actually, this pure sine tone isn't a very good way to example it, but you get what I'm talking about. So the wave folder, so as you said, we've switched the blend over. No, wave folder. So what a wave folder does is, wave folder effectively creates distortion, but rather than, so like a classic analog distortion, you basically kind of drive a signal in and it kind of hits a certain threshold and then it distorts at that threshold, creating new harmonics. What a wave folder does is it's kind of a similar thing where you're driving the signal in. Once that frequency hits a certain threshold, what happens is that the kind of upper part of that frequency wave is then kind of folded back down, hence the term folding. And you can kind of see there's a little diagram here which sort of displays how it works on a triangle wave. You kind of got triangle wave there. You get it kind of coming down like an M shape. So this is with no wave folding here. So as we turn that up, you can hear it's folding that wave in on itself. It's creating loads of nice extra harmonics. And then we've got this bias control here. And what the bias does is that basically adjusts the symmetry of that wave as it's being folded down, which will then alter the tonal characteristics. So those are the two.
So already there's quite a lot of tonal variation you can have just by switching your order around and blending the two together.
Yeah, and then obviously let's go back to, as we said we would, these two oscillators. So let's turn the waveform down, put this into the center there. So like I said, at the moment we've got a basic sine wave coming out here, but then we can dial in this mod VCO and tune it. So there we go. Obviously, we're kind of just in classic analog synth style. We're just blending two oscillators there, but we could turn that down and instead use the mod oscillator to modulate the output of that sine wave. Or we could have the ring mod. And so ring mod is basically you kind of, it's like audio rate modulation, but instead of kind of modulating the frequency, you're basically sort of multiplying the outputs of the two waves. It's kind of gives you this nice metallic-y sound.
More chime to it,
Then we've got a noise output here with a tone control, which is kind of filtering the noise for higher or lower. And obviously we can use all of these in conjunction. And then you've also got on these oscillators here, let's just turn all these down for a second just so I can show you. We've also got these envelopes, envelope generators here, which are attached to these. So these two envelope generators here, 1 and 2, are kind of main modulation sources here. Like on some of these other Moog semi-modular instruments, they're really basic little envelopes, which have basically just got a decay control. So you've basically got a fixed attack.
Okay.
And then just a kind of basic decay.
Pretty rudimentary for
rudimentary.
everything else.
What they're really good
here.
for, which is good on something like this, is like if you dial in some frequency modulation using one of these, they're really good for like kind of percussive kind of kicks and stuff like that. Let's take that noise down.
Nice.
Let's bring the sequencer back into the play. So as I said, the parallel element in part comes from these two parallel signal chains, which we can blend in various different ways. Obviously, we will come to the fact that it's got this patch bay as well because it's semi-modular. So when I was saying we can blend and do these different things, there's a lot more you can do.
Yes, of course.
Rerouting things here. But the other parallel element comes from this sequencer, which is also the generative element of what's going on in Labyrinth. So when, just to kind of be basic for a second, when we use the phrase generative, what that basically means is that you've got an element of the synthesizer or an element of the workflow which is creating things for us either based on like a predefined set of rules or on randomization. So generative music basically is like you would set up a load of different systems that kind of create notes and melodies and rhythms and things. And so that's kind of what's going on here. So you've got these basic 8-step sequences here. And you can see they're referred to as bits.
Right.
So that's because rather than thinking of these step sequences like you would a standard step sequence on a synth, where we've got, you know, where you would kind of program a note on each step or whatever and a kind of a length or things. These are effectively just on-off messages.
Okay.
So what we can do is, like, if we just take this top one here, turn these down. So we've got sequencer CV range here, which controls the range of the output. Let's turn that all the way up. And let's turn that all the way up on this first oscillator here.
Okay.
So basically what that means is that the output of this is going to be modulating the pitch of that that first oscillator. So these bits, when we program the sequencer, we can just, let's just advance it to a step, and then we press bit flip, and bit flip basically just selects whether one of these is on or off at any one time. So let's just look at this top sequencer here now. So basically I'm just putting in some steps here, and what are those? Those are all just an on or off message.
Okay.
However, as well as sending, kind of being on and off and sending a trigger, they're also sending a random voltage level. So that voltage level, in this case, because we've got the CV range turned up and we've got it routed to the pitch of the oscillator, that's basically going to control the pitch. But we can't input specific notes for that, but we can control it in a way. So let's, if I press play. So you can hear, because we've got the CV range turned up, if if we turn that down, all the way down, obviously we're just getting one consistent pitch. You can hear it's stepped, because one thing we can do with the sequencer is we can quantize it to output around a certain scale.
Right, okay.
So you can kind of hear those kind of steps. That's because we're kind of basically shrinking down the range of notes that it's outputting.
Yeah.
So the interesting thing here as well is this corrupt dial here. So let me just stop this a second. So these corrupt controls, what they do is they increase basically the level of randomization that's going on in these sequencers. So when we have corrupt turned all the way down like that, that means that although these are generating random notes, as you can hear, those are random. It's a randomized sequence, but the randomized sequence is staying the same, if you get what I mean.
Yeah.
So as we turn corrupt up, like before this midway point, what that will do is increases the randomization of those notes. So we've got the same rhythm, but the pitches themselves that are being sent to, or the kind of the output CV frequencies, CV levels of the sequencer are being randomized each time we're going around. If we turn this past the 12 o'clock kind of midway point, what this starts to do then is also randomize the rhythm. Okay. So you see, as this scrolls through, some of these will start flipping on and off. So it will kind of flip these bits from on off. And so all the way up, we've now got a completely randomized, all over the place pattern.
Right, gotcha.
So we've got two of these.
So
here.
one is each one tied to each voice oscillator, whatever.
Well, you can see there's certain places in the control panel where, these are kind of the semi-modular stuff comes into play, where they're kind of rooted naturally. So sequencer 1, this top one, is rooted to the pitch of VCO 1, and this second one is going to the pitch that mod VCO here. And then they're also the sequencer 1, you can dial into the level of the wave folder, sequencer 2, the cut-off frequency, and then you can see also here we've got the controls for routing the two decay envelopes to these kind of parallel things. Obviously, the beauty of this being semi-modular and having patch points is that we have patch points for both of these. Meaning that we can route them to a whole load of different things, as well as those kind of onboard things. I mean, let's just get a little sequence going. I'll just show you both in action for a moment. So that's that first sequence going there, and we've only got the first oscillator in play. Let's bring the second oscillator in and just tune it. So now if I turn up the corrupt here, you hear we're getting randomization. So another thing we can do to mess with these a little bit, let's just turn the decay down and make it a little bit more.
Can you chain the two to, so are you able
we
to?
We can use the chain sequence here. So what that does is then it turns these two 8-step sequences into one 16-step one. We can also adjust the length of these. So let's just bring the length of this second one down here. But one of my favorite little tools we can use with these is this trigger mix. So you can see we've got this all the way over to sequencer 1 at the moment. Okay. Basically what this does is like I said, these are kind of, these bits, as well as sending out a random voltage, are sending out effectively a trigger, which is like a off or on message. And what that does, that trigger is routed to the amplifiers. So that's what's triggering the amplifiers and triggering whether we hit sound, essentially. What we can do is, obviously, if we turn this all the way to the other way, it's now the bits on this second randomized sequence that are triggering whether we hear anything from the amplifiers. But if we mix this anywhere else, so in the middle point here, both of these are now triggering our amp envelopes, by an equal amount, but anywhere in between, you kind of effectively have one, if you can hear, like, so this top one here is basically always triggering it at a higher level, whereas we've got the randomized one here, which is triggering the amp envelopes, but effectively at a lower velocity, if you know, get what I mean.
Yeah.
So we can kind of use that. It's quite a nice way to kind of have these almost like ghost notey things. I'm going to set up a little something a little bit different quickly, just to show you that in action.
Okay.
And let's just unplug that MIDI input there. Cool. So what I've set up here is something really basic to just kind of show these parallel sequences in action and how they can interact with everything. So all we're going to do is just set up a kind of basic little kick and hi-hat thing going on.
Yeah.
So you can see I've got just 4 beats coming from this top sequencer. These are sequencing this VCO, which is in sort of simple sine wave, tuned low. We've got a bit of frequency modulation coming from the first envelope, which is going to give us a little kind of punchy kick drum like that.
Sure, right.
Punchy 4/4 kick drum. This is going into the wave folder. I've got these two in parallel. This is just going into the wave folder, and I've got the wave folder turned down completely because we don't want, if we turn it up, it starts to distort a bit, but we want that nice clean sine wave thing going on.
Yeah, gotcha.
What we're going to do is use this second sequencer to kind of do a little randomized hi-hat thing. So you can see I've patched the noise output. We've got the modulation oscillator here completely down. We're not using that for anything in this patch at all.
Yeah.
Got the noise patched into the filter. So that's basically going into that separate parallel sequencer path. And then we're using the 2 different envelopes. You can see I've got the wave folder amp being triggered by envelope 1 here, which we're also using to kind of for that pitch modulation, which is giving us that nice simple kind of round and punchy kick. And then the second envelope here is going to trigger the filter, which has just got noise for a simple kind of hi-hatty sound.
Yeah, okay.
So at the moment nothing's coming from that because they've got the second sequencer here, which would be doing the triggering, and there's nothing going into it. But as we turn up this corrupt thing, if I turn this all the way up to, like we said, the second half, you'll see these start to flip on.
There it is, revealed.
And suddenly we've got this little kind of randomized pattern.
Yeah.
And now I can turn that down, and that, if I turn that all the way down, obviously that's just now
You're stuck there,
a consistent thing. But if we have it turned up, get a nice little randomized pattern. I mean, what we could do as well as that, so this is going into the filter, which I've got in bandpass mode here. We can sweep it for different tones. And as I said, we can use this noise tone to change that noise. But what's quite cool as well is obviously we've got a resonant filter, so we can turn up the resonance here. And then we can use that second sequence also to then randomize the cutoff point with a bit of resonance, give us a little bit of a...
Yeah, almost getting into sort of snare territory.
Yeah, and we can then turn up that. As you can see, we've kind of quite quickly just used those 2 sequences to get a cool little, quite fun little, randomized loop going.
Yeah.
And then obviously, of course, we could use the corrupt thing here I could then randomize the kick a bit as well. So if we want to just kind of, create some little ideas and little patterns, then and we could be like, oh, I like that, turn these down.
Yeah, gotcha.
We can also use, so there's a variety of button presses that can be achieved by the sequencer here to do different things. As I alluded to before, one of the things we can do is we can quantize these sequences to different scales, so major, minor, and some slightly more interesting options. We can also use them to chain the 2 sequences together. As we said earlier, we can use it to kind of capture what we've got. If we wanted to then randomize a bit, we can grab that and not be worried about randomizing and be able to kind of jump back to our save slot, which is useful.
Yeah.
And then
that's the buffer, is that right?
Yes, we can use the buffer to do that, and then we can also use that this kind of dual things, like we can just quickly clear it like that, things like that. So that's kind of the basic workings of the sequencer and how it can be used to inspire kind of cool little ideas, which is one of the things I really like about this. So, as I said, we talked through the elements separately, the kind of the sequencer, the synth path, and the sequencer, but they come together really nicely to form this kind of mash of, I guess, what you would call kind of West Coast synthesis ideas. So West Coast synthesis being, in the modular synthesis world, you have these kind of original two schools, one being the Moog East Coast school, which is kind of what we know as traditional subtractive analog synthesizer, and then West Coast, which is kind of in line with the synth being designed by like Don Buckler and kind of
Surge and all that.
Yeah, that
business,
which generally has more ideas in it, like what we're seeing here, which is it makes use often of audio rate modulation and wave folders, a common element of West Coast synth design.
Yeah.
As are low pass gates, which we don't have here, but that's another thing. But also the whole kind of emphasis on randomization and generative ideas, and kind of moving away from traditional ideas of pitch and melody is all very West Coasty. And so it's nice to have that included here. It means that Labyrinth feels like a really nice mix between
a blend of the two.
Moog, kind of classic Moog ideas and some of that West Coast stuff. So let's get on to a few things that I are less sure about with Labyrinth. So it goes without saying we haven't really got opinion-y yet, but as you can see from talking about this, there's a lot I really like about this. It's really interesting.
Yes.
Blends East and West kind of ideas nicely. It does some very cool things. It can be really fun for inspiring ideas. One kind of slight bugbear, although it's not really a problem, which I'm going to demo for you now, is the fact that, as we've spoken about, these two envelopes, let's just unpatch all of these for a second. So these, the two envelopes, like on some of these other Moog semi-modulars, are basically just really simple decay only envelope generators. So you basically have a fixed attack and then a decay coming out of that you can adjust, but that's all you get.
Yeah.
And I kind of understand why that exists on a lot of these Moog things, particularly like this and DFAM, because basically what it does is it leans very heavily into a percussive sound palette. But I think actually in the case of Labyrinth, that kind of undersells what it's capable of.
Yeah.
So as we were talking through this, the kind of synth engine setup earlier on, it's with the audio rate modulation and all these features, you can get some really cool and weird atonal and kind of atonal droney textures out of it, which aren't necessarily that useful with just those short, punchy envelopes. So we have ditched the MIDI for a moment, and I'm just taking a pitch output from the KeyStep Pro and putting it into the pitch of this first oscillator here, just to show what's going on.
Okay.
Now, rather than obviously to normally trigger the envelopes, we'd need to take a gate output here and put it into the trigger input here, which would then trigger those envelopes. But we're going to get something else involved. Yeah, so this is the Pocket Operator 400 from Teenage Engineering. We reviewed it ages ago. We've got mixed feelings about it, but we're not here to talk about that. But what it's really useful for is the fact that it's got all these modules here, two of which are ADSR envelopes. So we're going to make use of one of those in order to have a bit more control over what's going on with Labyrinth.
Sure.
So what I'm doing here is I'm going to take the trigger input of this envelope. I'm going to patch that from this gate output here on the KeyStep. So that when I play a note here, it's triggering the envelope. And then we're going to take an output from the envelope. Squeaky. Take output from this envelope and put it into let's use the VCA for the filter. Sure. So I've got the oscillator 1 here just going through. So what this will do is you can hear, let's just turn this all the way down to a pretty basic envelope at the start. So you can hear.
Yeah. Not too dissimilar to.
We can play that, not dissimilar. But what we can then do is we can turn up like the release and the attack times on here.
Yeah. Okay.
And you can hear now we've got just better overall control of the shape of that envelope. kind of becomes really nice once we start dialing in maybe like a little bit of ring mod. Let's take a second output actually from this envelope. Take a second envelope. We could use the other envelope here, but we're just going to use one for now. And let's put that into the cutoff so that we can use that. Turn up the CV control there. So we can use the envelope to control the cutoff as well. Of course, we could do some other things as well, like let's take this LFO here, simple LFO, turn it down to slow rate and maybe put that into the VCA for the wave folder. So you can hear that then starts to rise and fall.
Yeah.
Which is kind of nice for these kind of sustained notes.
Yeah.
If we wanted to kind of get a bit drony,
Yes,
which is something that's really nice with these kind of West Coast synths, is to do that sort of drony, noisy textures. Put a bit of noise in here too. Dial that ring mod a bit. Kind of get some weird drones and things going on.
Yeah.
I won't get too deep into that because it'll sort of lose me in some horrible noise hole. Let's just unplug all that. But basically, that's kind of a very quick example of how actually having that semi-modular patch bay does mean that like you can patch in. And of all of these Moog semi-modulars, I think Labyrinth is probably the one, like at least up there as being the one that I would say would be a great addition to like as like a self-contained synth voice in a Euro rack, because obviously you've got, if you put this into a Euro rack context, you've got those, you could use whatever LFOs or envelopes or controller you've got to patch into the separate amplifiers. Then you've got this little randomizing sequencer, which would be really fun to patch out to whatever you've got in your modular rig. So I mean, if I was going to choose one of these Moog semi-modulars to say add this to your Euro rack,
this one's got the most.
This is probably the most fun.
Yeah.
The other thing is worth mentioning on this is that you've got this U-mix here. So I think Mother 32 does, but I think this is one of the only two within the range that has any type of utility involved. I think. Am I right in that, Mother 32?
I'm not going to let you hang yourself out to try on that one.
Oh, yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm right about
awful.
That. But what that means is basically having a utility is kind of, something that kind of adds to the functionality of the patch bay.
Yeah.
In the case here, that's basically a mixer. So you've got this UMix 1, which is internally routed from the ring mod, and then UMix 2, which you can patch into. I think UMix 1 is, UMix 2 is always sent through at full level, but then UMix 1 has this level control here. Okay. And what that does basically is it blends the two inputs, which can then patch out from that UMix 1 and 2.
Yeah.
So what that means is it can work as a mixer to blend two inputs or two control signals or whatever you want to blend, or you can use it just patching into that one and use this as an attenuator. So for example, when we had the LFO coming from this and then into there, if we wanted to have more control over the level of that modulation, or say the level of the modulation coming from this mod VCO, we can patch it via this and then use this to control. Right. So it's a really handy thing to have involved in the patch bay. It's a nice addition there. As ever with these synths, because there's limitations to the patch bay, there is things that we would probably like more control over, but not in a way that's debilitating. You know, for example, I would love to be able to modulate the decays of these envelopes,
Sure,
whatever,
right.
or this sweepable filter between low pass and band pass. It'd be lovely to have that as a modulatable control,
Right.
like send an LFO to that to kind of modulate
Get you, see?
the type of thing. But again, these are kind of splitting hair things of like the level of control and the ins and outs we've got here are generally well judged, and there's a lot of fun you can have and a lot you can do with it.
Yeah.
You'll see we'll record some audio demos after this, which we'll have within the video, so you can kind of see a few possibilities.
Yes, of course. Yeah. And have
So on the whole,
some idea of it.
I actually really like Labyrinth. I think it's one of the most interesting things that Moog have released, and it's one of the most interesting things that anyone's released recently, I think. Nice blend of East and West. It's inspiring. It's the kind of thing that like you will just stick on a desktop, sit and play some noises and record them. You'll come up with ideas.
Yeah.
You can throw it into things. It would, like, as I say, make a lovely addition to a Eurorack setup, particularly if you're going for like generative IDM ambient things where you want these random bleeps or percussive tones or things like that. It works great for that.
I'm sensing a caveat.
A
to all of
caveat,
this.
you know. Yeah, there is a caveat to all of this.
Yeah.
Which is, so when we reviewed Spectravox a few weeks ago, we mentioned in that review that was the first hardware product released by Moog since they were taken over by In Music and since they moved all of the production, all of the kind of assembly at least, away from their long-standing North Carolina, Asheville HQ. So with Spectravox, we said there wasn't a kind of noticeable drop in build quality or anything like that.
Yeah.
With Labyrinth, I don't feel that's quite as true.
Right.
So with both of them, you'll note on the back you've got these little made in Taiwan sign on the back. So obviously telling us that the construction's been outsourced. On the whole, it's, you know, it's not like I would say this feels flimsy or badly made, but there are a few design choices that I think feel a little bit cheaper than some of these previous Moog things. One being the like over-reliance on these little mini rotaries here. Now these are nothing new if you've seen DFAM before, or say like Subharmonicon or other ones in the range. Both DFAM and Subharmonicon use these little rotaries for their sequencers, and then Spectravox, which we reviewed last, had them for the individual bands of its filter.
Yeah. And a lot of manufacturers are making toppers for them, so you can. Yeah,
so they're nothing new. To be honest, I've never liked them on any of these Moog things. Like DFAM particularly, it makes the engaging with a DFAM sequencer quite annoying.
Yeah.
But this is, I think, of all of the ones, this is the most prominent I felt that these have been, because obviously a lot of the time you have them kind of limited to sequencers and things like that. You might, which you might set and leave, or you might kind of fiddle with less. But here, obviously, quite a lot of the controls get these little rotaries, and it does make the whole workflow feel noticeably fiddlier than a lot of other things.
But they are cramming a lot into that interface, aren't they?
They are cramming a lot.
You can see why they have had to do that,
which is fair enough, and I
you
get
forgive
that
them
and appreciate. Yeah, forgive them that. The thing that I like
is
even
unforgivable.
less is the buttons used for this little sequencer. And again, look, I'll give them the fact that clearly they're cramming a sequencer into a kind of very small space, but these little kind of wobbly plastic uncapped buttons, they kind of feel very wobbly. I have no faith that these are going to hold up for like years of pushing.
Yes.
And they feel horrible.
Yeah.
They feel really horrible to use. They're like kind of painful little buttons that are really wobbly. There's also a lot of multiple kind of button presses, as I alluded to.
Yes.
Which, I'll be honest, the reason, like for example, certain buffer things and things like that, the reason I haven't demoed in this is because actually, without getting my phone out and checking it, I can't remember how half of these work. So rather than slow this down and get my phone out and look at the manual, side point on that again, as with Spectravox we mentioned, these Moog things used to come with really lovely A4 printed manuals, and that's now
long gone.
That's now limited to kind of little small fold out quick start guides.
Yeah.
Which in the case of Labyrinth, I think is kind of useless because actually it doesn't even touch on the sequencer or anything like that.
Right.
Obviously, you do get a link to the proper manual.
Yeah.
You could, you can access it through QR codes and things like that. But it's really annoying not having that manual, particularly as you've got all of these little unlabeled button presses and things like that. What you do get, which is really nice still, are these
The
these overlays,
like them.
which basically you kind of pop over. If you do it the correct way around,
Yeah.
pop them over the synth itself, and it kind of gives you, these basically work like little presets.
Let's have a quick look. Show us what we've got. Instant techno.
Yeah,
drums.
they work like little presets, showing you kind of how to
You get
set
5.
up these basic sounds.
Yeah.
And these are really nice. They're a nice touch still. So, but yeah, we miss the big printed manual, and then I just hate the way that you interact with this sequencer.
Sure.
Could I overlook that? Definitely. It's something like,
It's got more to it that
it's
forgivable.
It's a nice thing that's forgivable. It's just like compared to say the Sub 32 where you have
The Mother 32.
Mother 32
Yeah.
subharmonic and mashing them up.
Yeah.
Compared to the Mother 32, where you have these, you do have small buttons, but they're kind of rubberized with little ones. Same with the subharmonicon.
Yeah.
You get these little rubberized ones, which you kind of feel like these here could have been.
Yeah. They wouldn't take up that similar sort of real estate.
And I'll be honest, it feels like they've gone for the cheaper option here.
Yeah.
Similarly, although it's not a massive thing, these run and stop and trigger buttons on the Labyrinth, at least on our review unit here, are noticeably less responsive than on the DFAM
Previous.
that I've got at home.
Okay.
You'll notice that you kind of have to give these a really good shove, and kind of I found a little bit unreliable. Not worryingly so, but it's noticeable. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's because it's it's a new thing that like you say, the build is now elsewhere.
Yeah,
we're going to pick up on that.
And whether that is actually correlation is not causation, etc., etc. Whether that is an example of the fact that it's been moved elsewhere might be. And as you say, it could literally be whether we'd even noticed these things, whether our mind wasn't on them.
Exactly.
I think we probably would. I think I'd hate that sequence or whatever, but
it's the name that means something, and you kind of do expect a better build quality of sorts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not, it's not worryingly bad, but it feels a bit cheaper than its
sure.
its stablemates. But setting all of that aside, as you've probably picked up on, I really like Labyrinth. It's really fun. It's I think, compared to Spectravox, where we mentioned it last time, saying the thing about Spectravox is it's fun, but it really comes into its own when you mix it with other things, and it's probably something that you would only really want if you've got other Moog semi-modular things to work nicely with it.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Labyrinth, I feel like I would recommend to someone standalone. As we touched on, there's more that you can do when you add additional envelopes. There's more that you can do when you send it out to a wider ecosystem and things. But the fact that it's got MIDI, so you could quite easily connect it up to a DAW. It's got gate and CV to use with something like KeyStep. And also, it's just a self-contained little ideas box that can inspire cool little bleepy melodies and rhythmic patterns and things like that. And so, as a standalone purchase, I think it makes a lot more sense than some of these semi-modulars in the range.
It's got something different. That whole parallel thing with these West Coast wave folding.
And at the kind of price point, setting aside anything we've said about the build quality, I think being cheap. I think at the price point for what you get out of it, $599 dollars and euros. I think it's in that ballpark for the kind of thing. But it's basically the same price point as its kind of siblings.
Yeah, they're all
in the range. They're all around that point. So for that $599 price point, I feel like, setting aside any build quality things, you get a lot of capabilities and a lot of fun in the box. I think it's well pitched and well priced at that point.
Yeah. Okay. So Labyrinth has come in at number 1 on the whole semi-modular Moog thing. I like that.
Well, I think we're going to do that as a separate video. Let's do that as a separate video, shall we?
Let's do that.
Let's do that. Shall we rate them?
Shall we rate them?
Yeah, so don't say it's number 1.
Well, no, we could change our mind, because we did that with the Volkers. We
Yeah.
did that with the Volkers. We changed our mind pretty much on a daily basis. So
Knowing us, we'll probably change our mind halfway through the video itself.
yeah. Okay.
Come back for that at some point.
We'll do that, definitely. That's a promise. You've got us nailed to it. Well, let's round that up, shall we?
Yep.
Thanks for watching. if you agree with the whole build thing, if you care, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and like it and all that business. And we'll see you next time for more gear reviews and such. And yeah, so we'll see you soon. Cheers.
Thanks.